Ben Carter's days were predictable. He chopped wood at dawn, checked the greenhouse before lunch, and watched the fire die after dinner. Montana winters were quiet that way, brutal, but steady. He liked it. Or, he told himself he did. It was better than speaking, better than remembering. The only surprises came from nature. A fallen tree, a wandering deer, the storm that knocked out the radio last week. But that night, just after midnight, something else broke the pattern. It began with a soft scratching, barely louder than the wind. Then came a low, aching sound, half growl, half whimper. Ben stood in silence, hand hovering over the door handle. Then he opened it, and everything, routine, sorrow, silence, was wiped away. A wounded tiger, standing just beyond the porch light. 2 cubs trembling beside it. Not a vision, not a hallucination. A family on the edge of death, asking for shelter from a man who had forgotten how to give it. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Snow fell in relentless silence across the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana, shrouding the forested hills in thick, white stillness. The wind howled in cold bursts, rushing through the pines like ghostly whispers of forgotten winters. It was mid-January, and the mercury on the old glass thermometer outside Ben Carter's cabin had dropped far below freezing, nearly touching -20. The sky had long surrendered to night, but the land below glowed softly in pale blue under the weight of the storm. The cabin stood at the edge of a sharp drop, overlooking a narrow valley choked with frost. It was built decades ago from dark, hand-cut logs, and now stood like a battered sentinel against the elements. Inside, warm light flickered from a cast-iron stove, the only witness to the solitary life of the man within, Ben Carter. 62, tall and broad-shouldered, though slightly hunched now, sat beside the fire. Fingers curled around a chipped mug of black coffee. His beard, speckled gray, was neatly trimmed but betrayed his reluctance to let himself grow wild. His eyes, once alive with laughter and curiosity, had grown quieter, darker over the years. They held the weight of someone who had watched too many things die: patients, animals, people. He used to be a respected veterinarian in Missoula, once known for both surgical precision and genuine tenderness. But that was before the accident, before the icy morning when his wife Sarah had driven down Route 93 alone and never returned. She was 54, still full of wild dreams, short and willowy with soft laugh lines, the kind of woman who left handwritten notes in lunch boxes. The crash had broken more than bones and metal. It had cracked Ben's world into pieces that he had no energy or desire to glue back together. Their daughter Lena hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. She had wanted him to come back to the world. He had chosen the mountains instead. A log snapped loudly in the stove. Ben blinked, pulled from memory. He sipped his coffee and leaned forward to feed the fire more wood. Just then, something strange caught his attention. A sound. It was faint, but not the sound of tree branches or wind. Scratch, scratch, a low, broken growl. Ben stiffened. The hairs on his arms prickled. He stood slowly, placing the mug on the hearth, and reached for the heavy flashlight resting on the shelf by the window. He clicked it on, crossed the wooden floor, and gently peeled back the thick curtain. His breath fogged the glass. Nothing. Then it came again. A scraping, softer now. He opened the door halfway, and there, on the snow-covered porch, framed in wind and pale firelight, stood something impossible. A white tiger. Its massive body trembled with exhaustion. Snow clung to its fur in icy clumps. Its left foreleg was bent unnaturally, smeared with dark blood that had frozen into stiff lines. But most haunting of all was the way it stood, its broad chest puffed outward, sheltering two small cubs huddled beneath its belly. Ben's breath hitched. The tiger was larger than any cat he had seen up close in decades. Its fur was dull with dirt, its ribs faintly visible, but its eyes were watchful, not feral. It did not snarl, it did not lunge, it simply stared. The cubs, one slightly larger than the other, shivered violently. One of them let out a high-pitched, almost pitiful yelp. Ben's instincts warred with logic. No, screamed one part of his brain. This is a wild animal, a predator. But another voice, quieter but firmer, said something different. These were not eyes seeking prey. They were eyes asking for something more ancient than hunger. Refuge. Ben stepped forward. The snow cracked underfoot. The tiger did not move. I must have lost my damn mind. He muttered. He moved to the side, pulling the door open all the way. Warm air rushed out in a wave. The tiger's whiskers twitched, slowly, cautiously. The great beast took a step forward, then another. The cubs followed, pressed tightly against each other like shadows. When the tiger passed the threshold, its shoulder brushed against Ben's coat. It was warm, alive. Ben closed the door behind them and leaned against it, heart pounding. The cabin seemed suddenly smaller, the air heavier. The tiger limped forward and collapsed near the fireplace with a low groan, curling its body around the cubs. The larger cub was a male, with a tiny black smudge on its forehead. The smaller one, a female, was thin, her breathing uneven. Ben crouched, keeping his hands visible. Slow in his movements. Easy, he whispered, not knowing if it was for them or himself. He looked closely at the adult's injured leg. The wound was deep, likely from a trap or rough terrain, but not infected yet. "I'm going to help you," he murmured. He moved to the supply cabinet in the corner, though he hadn't practiced medicine in years. His hands remembered. He retrieved gauze, antiseptic, and scissors, then returned to the tiger's side. The tiger growled softly, baritone and warning, but didn't lift its head. Its eyes followed Ben's hands. He cut away the blood-matted fur with shaking fingers, cleaned the gash, and began to wrap the limb. The cubs stirred, watching but not interfering. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, wind battering the windows. Inside, a man and 3 wild creatures lay curled in a reluctant trust. When Ben finally sat back in the wooden chair, exhaustion draped over him like a heavy coat. The tiger was asleep now, breath slow but strong. The cubs were nestled close against its belly, no longer shivering. He looked at them, then at the flames, and let out a long, unsteady breath. Outside, the mountains slept. Ben woke to the faint sound of breathing, heavy, deliberate, not human. For a fleeting moment, he thought it had all been a dream. But when he opened his eyes, the truth lay right there by the fireplace. Ash, the white tiger, lay with his broad head resting on the wooden floorboards, chest slowly rising and falling. His 2 cubs were nestled tightly against his side. Blizzard stretched out like a sleepy lion cub. Willow curled into herself, twitching slightly with each exhale. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. Ben rubbed his hands together and pulled on his flannel jacket. His joints ached, but not with age, with uncertainty. He wasn't sure what today would bring. All he knew was that 3 lives now rested in his hands. He stepped into the kitchen, making as little noise as possible. He started a pot of coffee and then chopped up leftover elk meat from his freezer, He hadn't hunted in over a year, but a neighbor, Henry Belk, a broad-shouldered retired game warden who still believed every problem could be solved with a good story and a sharper knife, had brought him some in exchange for a stack of chopped wood. The irony of feeding elk to a tiger wasn't lost on Ben when he returned with the plate of meat. Ash's eyes were open, not wide, not wild, just watchful. Still. Ben crouched low, setting the plate a few feet away, and backed up slowly. The cubs stirred. Blizzard approached first, sniffing the air with a series of rapid, twitchy movements. He was bolder, with an awkwardly long tail and big paws he hadn't grown into. He took one bite and then growled low, possessive, triumphant. Willow watched, hesitant, before finally following. Ash didn't move. He merely blinked. "You're still guarding them," Ben said softly. Watching the tiger's leg, he'd have to rewrap the wound today. Maybe apply a bit more antiseptic. But the swelling hadn't worsened, and that alone felt like a small miracle. Time passed in a strange rhythm. The tigers ate, then dozed. Ben cleaned, wrote in his journal, and tried not to question his sanity. Outside, snow blanketed the landscape, silencing everything but the wind. Later that day, Ben approached Ash with a roll of bandages and his old first aid kit. He moved slowly, speaking in a low tone. Ash. He called him. Almost out of reflex, the name felt right, short, grounded. A word that carried both destruction and what's left when the flame passes. Ash lifted his head but didn't growl. That was progress. Ben crouched beside him, the floor cold even through his worn jeans, and began unwrapping the previous night's work. The fur around the wound was sticky and matted, but the skin beneath wasn't discolored. Infection hadn't set in. Ash flinched once but didn't swipe. Behind them, Blizzard knocked over a lantern with a clatter, then bounded back with a startled huff, his ears pulled back, Willow, more delicate and thinner than her brother, blinked slowly at the noise, then licked at her paw. Ben chuckled softly. "You're a menace already." He muttered at the cub. He couldn't help it. He was growing fond of them. They had brought warmth into this cabin that had, for years, housed only cold coffee and older ghosts. That night, as the snow fell heavier, Ben sat in his old rocking chair, a book in his lap, unread. The cubs were asleep by the fire. Ash had repositioned himself slightly closer, not in threat, but perhaps instinct, or trust. He took out the worn envelope from the drawer, the one he'd written 2 winters ago but never sent. On it, in faded handwriting, was her name, Lena Carter, in a 2-bedroom apartment in Chicago. Lena stood at her kitchen counter staring at that same envelope. She'd received it yesterday, slipped into a stack of forwarded mail from an old P.O. Mal box she'd finally remembered to close. Her dark hair was tied up messily. She wore a loose sweatshirt that belonged to her mother, and her hazel eyes, so much like her father's, were fixed on the words. She hadn't seen or spoken to Ben in almost 4 years, not since the funeral, not since he pushed everyone away, shutting himself off in that frozen house at the edge of the world. She'd begged him to come back, to let her help him, but he refused. The envelope was postmarked but never delivered. He must have written it and then changed his mind. Lena worked as a veterinary technician at an urban animal rescue center, her specialty being trauma stabilization. Irony, again. The woman trying to heal creatures while her own wounds remained untreated. She opened the letter. The handwriting was rigid, but familiar. "I miss your voice. I miss Sarah's, too. Though I hear hers when you speak. I'm sorry I made you grieve alone. I didn't know how to keep living with all that noise in my chest if you ever want to come home. or even right. I'm here. This house is cold without your laugh. Love always. Dad. Her eyes stung. She folded the letter, pressing it close to her chest. That night, she packed a small bag. Something had shifted. Perhaps it was time to go home, not for him, not yet, but for herself, back in Montana. The storm intensified. The world turned gray with dusk, and the wind screamed like a living thing. Ben tossed another log onto the fire. Ash stirred, lifting his head slowly. There was something in the way he looked at Ben tonight, a lessening of distance, not acceptance, but the edge of it, as if, should the world fall apart tonight, this stranger might be allowed to stand nearby. Ben leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. I don't know what brought you here, he said quietly. But maybe it's the same thing that keeps me here, trying to survive something that already happened. The cubs dreamed by the hearth, their tiny claws twitching, and outside. The snow fell in great, quiet sheets. The storm had passed, but the morning was slow to rise. Montana lay draped in thick silence, the kind that follows a night of hard snow and wind. Outside Ben Carter's cabin, the pines stood buried to their lower branches, their limbs heavy with white. The sun tried to cut through a sky the color of lead, offering only the palest silver light. A thin wisp of smoke curled from Ben's chimney, the only sign of life on this stretch of forested ridge inside. The scent of pine resin and boiled coffee mixed with something wild and unfamiliar, the musky, earthy scent of big cats. Ben crouched near Ash, the white tiger, unwrapping the old bandage to check on the healing wound. The big cat let out a deep exhale but didn't flinch. His breath steamed in the cabin's cool air. The cubs were curled nearby, Blizzard twitching in his sleep, Willow blinking slowly, watching Ben with that half-tired, half-trusting expression she'd started to wear more often. Ben smiled faintly. The wound was better than he'd dared hope. No pus, no spreading warmth, still raw, still red, but healing. He stood slowly, knees popping, and walked to the kitchen for a fresh bandage. Then the knock, not a scratch, not a growl. A knock, firm, quick, unmistakably human. Ben froze. The knock came again. He hesitated only a moment before grabbing the shotgun from behind the door. He didn't point it, but he held it tight. He opened the door crack. Standing in the snow was a woman in a navy blue parka, her hood trimmed with wind-blown faux fur. Scarf pulled high over her face. Snow clung to her boots and gloves, her eyes sharp, observant, a steely green locked on his. She lowered her scarf slowly. "Mr. Carter," she asked. "My name's Emily Brooks. I think I'm looking for something in your house." Ben's grip on the shotgun tightened a breath. "That depends. I'm with the Northern Wild Conservancy. I think you have a tiger." Ben opened the door fully. "3," he said flatly. "Come in." She stepped in carefully, brushing snow from her coat as she unzipped. Ben took her in more fully. Emily Brooks was in her mid-30s, average height, with a compact, athletic build. Her cheeks were wind-reddened, but her posture was composed, confident, not confrontational. Her brown hair was pulled into a low ponytail, damp at the ends. She moved like someone who had spent time in the field. No wasted motion, no nerves. Her eyes flicked to the cubs immediately, softening. "Oh my God," she breathed. She stepped closer, just enough to see all 3 tigers. Ash rumbled a warning low in his throat and raised his head. The cubs stirred. Willow gave a soft chirp, and Blizzard let out a tiny sneeze. Emily froze mid-step. Her hands lifted. Hey, it's okay. I'm not here to take them." I've been tracking them for 5 days. They disappeared during a transport truck lost control near the Canadian border. The adults were in containment crates, but Ash's was damaged. He escaped with the 2 cubs during the storm. Ben lowered the shotgun. And you followed them here. I followed broken tracks, blood trails, half a thermal signature, and a whole lot of luck, she said. The storm nearly wiped out their scent. I was getting ready to turn back. She crouched, slowly, still keeping distance from the animals. I thought they were dead. Ben poured her a mug of coffee and handed it over. She took it with a nod. You live here alone? She asked, mostly. He replied. Emily studied Ash. He won't let me get close. Huh. No, Ben said. Just me. I guess that's incredible, she murmured. Tigers raised in captivity rarely bond. And Ash was wild-born. He was rescued after poachers killed his mate. Ben looked at Ash with renewed understanding. That explains the way he moves, like he's used to hiding pain. Emily nodded. We tried pairing him with another adult, but he rejected every attempt. Then Blizzard and Willow were born 6 months ago, and suddenly he had purpose. Ash made a low chuffing sound and curled his tail protectively around the cubs. His eyes never left Emily. He doesn't trust anyone. Ben said, but he didn't bite me. Emily gave a small smile. That's something. Ash laid his head back down, warily watching her every move, far from the frozen mountains. A Greyhound bus rumbled through the flat, open plains of eastern Montana. Inside, Lena Carter sat by the window, her coat bundled over her knees, the windows fogged from inside. She wiped them with her sleeve and stared at the endless snow, thinking of her father's hands, steady, capable, and her mother's voice. In her lap was a leather-bound notebook, worn at the corners. It was her mother's journal. She had found it in a box last night, tucked between scarves and a faded Christmas card. She flipped to a page dated 2 years before the accident. Ben's trying to be strong again, but he doesn't know how to speak the language of grief. I wish he'd cry. I wish Lena saw how much he still loves us, even in silence. If anything happens to me, I hope Lena knows not to close her heart the way he does. That's not strength, it's fear in disguise. Lena blinked through the sting in her eyes and whispered to herself, I'm coming home. Mom. Back at the cabin, Emily rolled up her sleeves. His leg's not infected, that's good, but he needs proper antibiotics, and they need real food, raw meat, full portions, no seasoning. Do you have any not enough for long? Ben admitted. I can call my team, she said. Get a transport ready. If we sedate him carefully, we can move them by crate. Our facility's an hour south, safe, heated, monitored. Ben glanced at Ash. You'll have to go through me. Emily looked at him. I wasn't planning on skipping you. The temperature had dropped sharply by late afternoon, and a gray curtain of snow had begun its slow descent over the Bitterroot wilderness. Emily Brooks stood at the edge of the cabin's porch, hood drawn tight around her face. Scanning the distant tree line where the trail to the forest road disappeared into whiteness. The radio, clipped to her belt, hissed static. No signal. She frowned and clicked it off. The weather was turning faster than expected. Inside the cabin, Ben Carter knelt beside Ash, gently running his hand along the tiger's shoulder to the wounded leg. The swelling had gone down, but the damage was now clearer, tendons stiff, movement limited. Ash winced slightly when Ben pressed the joint. There was no rage, only resignation. Ben sighed, sitting back on his heels. He won't be able to hunt again, will he? Emily entered, brushing snow from her gloves. No, she said quietly. Not properly, maybe short distances, but not enough to survive in the wild. He's lost that precision. She knelt opposite Ben, eyeing the tiger's leg. We can build a habitat for him at the sanctuary, spacious, safe. He can stay with the cubs until they're old enough to be independent. Ash watched them with solemn eyes, his breath steady but shallow. They're not just cubs to him, Ben said. They're the reason he kept moving. Emily looked over at Blizzard and Willow curled together near the hearth. And you, she said softly, are the reason he let someone help him. Ben didn't answer. He turned his attention to the stove, added a log, and busied himself with the kettle, using the moment to collect himself. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow whipped past the windows in diagonal streaks, the edges of the glass beginning to frost. Emily peered out. It's coming in harder than forecast, she said. We won't get a transport team here in time. We need to find cover in case power goes out or trees fall. Ben nodded. There's an old trapping outpost 1/2 mile east. Wood walls, fireplace, still usable. Last I checked, we'll need to carry supplies, blankets, food for the cats. He was already grabbing the emergency packs. Let's go before the light's gone. They bundled the cubs in thick canvas wraps, carefully sedated Ash just enough to dull the pain, then loaded what they could onto a sled Ben had used for hauling firewood. The journey through the storm was brutal. The snow was knee-deep in climbing, and the path to the outpost, already narrow, had vanished beneath the drifts by the time they reached it. Both were soaked and shivering, fingers stiff. The outpost was little more than a log shack tucked between 2 hills, but it was solid. Ben forced open the door with a grunt and kicked the snow from his boots as Emily dragged the sled inside. The fireplace was intact. Within minutes, Ben had flames going, casting golden light across the cramped room. The cubs were set near the hearth, still drowsy from the sedative. Ash, too big to lie comfortably in the space, settled near the far wall on a blanket spread thick with straw. Emily peeled off her outer coat and leaned against the wall, her breath coming in slow, controlled pulls. Her cheeks were red, eyes tired but alert. Ben handed her a thermos, hot broth. She took it with a nod, cradling it between both hands. Thanks, for a long while. There was only the sound of wind and fire. Then Emily broke the silence. How long's it been since you told anyone about her? Ben looked up. His voice was rough. Sarah Emily nodded. He stared into the flames. 3 years. She was driving into town, bad ice on the ridge. I told her to wait. But she went anyway, said she wanted to pick up Lena's birthday package from the post office. He stopped. Jaw clenched. She didn't make it. He finished. Emily didn't interrupt. I didn't even go to the hospital, Ben said. They called, said it was instant. I just sat there, couldn't move, couldn't even cry. Lena was the one who made the arrangements after the funeral. She begged me to come stay with her in Chicago, but you didn't. He shook his head. I couldn't look her in the eyes. She looked too much like Sarah. He took a breath that trembled in his chest. I told myself I was protecting her, but the truth is I was just afraid. So I stayed here. I built a wall around myself and called it grief. Emily listened, gaze steady. She still wrote you every year. I didn't answer, outside. The storm deepened. The wind howled against the walls like something feral. The flames jumped and hissed. Willow stirred, letting out a soft, breathy cry in her sleep. Blizzard stretched, his oversized paw smacking Emily's boot before curling back under his body. Then came a knock. Not the wind, not the storm. A hand. Ben and Emily stared at each other. Ben stood first, He crossed the room, opened the door, and there, framed in swirling snow, stood a woman wrapped in a thick maroon coat and scarf, her hair damp from the wet flakes. She looked tired, cheeks flushed, suitcase in hand. "Lena," Ben whispered. She was in her late 20s now, taller than her mother, eyes darker than he remembered. Her hair, once tightly tied in buns and braids as a girl, now fell loose over her shoulders. Her face was sharp with emotion, fear, hope, something wounded trying not to show. I followed the old trail," she said, breathing hard, saw lights. Ben didn't move. "I read Mom's journal," she said. "I saw what you wrote. I needed to come." He stepped aside wordlessly. She walked in slowly, taking in the tigers, the fire, the smell of fur and snow and old wood. Emily stepped forward, wiping her hands. "Emily Brooks," she said gently. "Wildlife Conservancy." Lena nodded. "Lena Carter, daughter?" She crouched near the cubs, careful, almost reverent. "They're beautiful," she said. "Mom would have loved them." Ben's voice cracked. "They've changed everything." Lena looked at him, really looked, and then gave a small, trembling smile. "I know," she whispered. "So did you." She stood and stepped closer. "Dad," she said just one word, but it filled the room like a second fire. The dawn came quietly, like an apology, after the relentless roar of last night's storm. The morning was eerily still. A golden wash of light filtered through the cracks in the cabin walls, illuminating a world blanketed in white. Snow hung from the pines like overfilled bowls, and the landscape looked untouched, as though the chaos of the storm had never existed. Inside the old trapper's outpost, the fire had died down to glowing coals, but the air held the lingering warmth of survival. Ben Carter woke stiff and sore, wrapped in a wool blanket, back propped against the wall. Across the room, Ash lay with his head resting on his paws, eyes closed, his body rising and falling in slow, measured rhythm. Blizzard and Willow were curled against his side, both fast asleep, Blizzard's paws twitching in some kittenish dream. Willow's ears flicking slightly. Emily Brooks was already up. She sat cross-legged near the fireplace, notebook in hand, writing with brisk efficiency. Her coat was unzipped. Her cheeks still flushed from sleep, but her mind was clearly awake. She had the precise, unwavering focus of someone who operated best under pressure. Her hair was tied back tighter than the day before, jaw set firm, though her eyes softened each time she looked over at the animals. Ben shifted carefully and reached for the small kettle resting on the coals. The coffee inside was lukewarm but strong. He poured 2 tin mugs and handed one to Emily without a word. "They're coming," she said softly, nodding toward the radio lying on a folded tarp. "Transport crew left the sanctuary an hour ago. Roads are slow, but they should be here by late morning." Ben nodded. Storm cleared the worst of the path. Emily set the notebook down. "I told them about Ash's condition. We'll have to modify an enclosure, but I already submitted the request. If it's okay with you, we'll house all 3 together." Ben looked toward the tigers. Ash had opened his eyes. He was watching Blizzard chase his tail in sleepy circles. Willow batting gently at her brother's clumsy swipes. For a moment, the great tiger's expression shifted, something softer, quieter. He leaned forward and licked Willow's ear. "He's a father," Ben said quietly. "Maybe not by blood, but the way he shields them, watches them sleep. It doesn't come from instinct alone." Emily nodded. "He's earned his place. There's an enclosure near the south end of the property. High pine trees, shaded corners, a stream that runs through it in spring. It's often used for our more solitary cats, those too injured or traumatized to return to the wild. He'd be comfortable there, and the cubs could grow with him until they're ready to transition. Ben looked down at the floorboards. "It's strange," he said. "I thought I was saving them, but they were saving me." From the far corner, Lena stirred. She'd arrived the night before like a ghost from a dream, snow-damp and tearful, but had found her place beside the animals with the quiet ease of someone born into it. She sat up now, brushing hair from her eyes. Her face was softer, younger somehow, sleep erasing the weight she carried when she arrived. "Morning," she said, her voice still husky. Ben handed her the last mug of coffee. She accepted it, their fingers brushing. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I am too." They sat for a moment in shared silence, watching the cubs tumble over each other like siblings on a playground. Ash turned his gaze toward Ben. Then, with careful intent, he rose, favoring his injured leg but walking without protest, and crossed the short space between them. He lowered his head and pressed it, gently but fully, into Ben's hand. Ben froze, then let his hand settle across the tiger's thick skull, his fingers sliding into the white fur. No growl, no warning, only weight and warmth and something like gratitude. Emily exhaled softly. "He knows," she said. "He knows it's time." Hours later, the sound of engines echoed down the narrow trail. The snowmobile team arrived first. 2 people bundled in full cold-weather gear, Chase and Tara, both sanctuary staff. Chase was tall and lean, with a close-shaved head and quick, quiet hands. Tara was stockier, round-faced, and wore mirrored goggles that made her look perpetually unreadable. But the way she cooed softly to Willow as she transferred the cub to a padded crate betrayed a tenderness. Ash required careful sedation, just enough to keep him calm, not unconscious. Ben stayed close the entire time, stroking his fur, murmuring beneath his breath. The transport cage was wide and steel-framed, lined with hay and blankets. Ash walked in willingly, pausing only once to glance back toward the hearth before settling beside his cubs. The crew packed up efficiently, once the final crates were secured and the sleds fastened. Emily turned to Ben. "You did more than keep them alive," she said. "You gave them a chance to trust again." Ben shook his head. "They gave me a reason to feel again." She smiled and offered her gloved hand. "We'll keep you updated. Tell Ash I'll visit. You better." As the convoy disappeared into the trees, snow crunching beneath treaded boots and sled runners, Ben stood beside Lena outside the outpost. "You going back to Chicago?" he asked after a while. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled her coat tighter and watched the clouds drift over the mountain ridge. "I think I'll stay a while," she said. "Someone's got to look after that old cabin you left behind." Ben's throat tightened. "I haven't earned forgiveness." "Lena, you don't have to," she replied. "Just show up this time." He nodded. "I will." The wind picked up again, but it wasn't cruel. It carried only cold and the promise of something new. In the silence of snow and the warmth of unexpected companionship, we are reminded that miracles don't always come with trumpets or thunder. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the form of a wounded tiger and his 2 fragile cubs, or in a long-lost daughter returning home through the storm. This story is not just about survival, it's about redemption, about how love, even when buried under years of grief, can thaw, about how trust can be rebuilt between man and beast, between father and child, and about how, When we open our doors in faith instead of fear, healing can find its way back in. Perhaps it was more than chance that led Ash and his cubs to Ben's door. Perhaps it was God's way of whispering, "You are not alone," in the wild beauty of nature and in the courage to care again. We catch glimpses of grace, proof that even in the coldest season, hope still burns. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment that felt like a miracle, something that changed you quietly, but forever? Type Amen in the comments if you believe God still works in mysterious and beautiful ways. May His blessings guide you through every storm, just as He guided these souls to one another. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs a reminder that love and light can find us, even in the snow.